Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bridging Careers. So this is the Bridging Careers Centering Yourself session, focusing on mental health. This is the second of 10 free events this week with over 40 amazing speakers. I'd really like to begin by paying respect to the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I'm Yvonne Kelly. I'm the founder of Glow Up Careers. We're a tech-enabled, growing global career coaching community and social enterprise. That's why we're bringing you Bridging Careers in partnership with Cisco. And we have some of our Cisco team on here today helping us out on YouTube Live. All of the speakers have volunteered their time, and we're so grateful for them sharing their knowledge in this current environment. This session will run for 90 minutes. So if you'd like to share or comment on social media, we'll be using the hashtag Bridging Careers. So that's hashtag Bridging Careers, all one word. And we'll also be live tweeting the event, so feel free to share and comment. Our Instagram account and Twitter handle is @GlowUpCareers. So please make sure to let us know what you think and give feedback. Also, on the right-hand side of your screen on YouTube Live, you'll see a chat box. So feel free to jump in there and ask any questions or comment. Remember that mental health can be a sensitive topic. So for some of our audience attending today, if this session brings up any feelings of distress, please refer to the comments on your screen. We'll put a list of providers in the chat now on YouTube Live so you can access them, or always call 000 in an emergency. So let's get straight into this session where we're going to hear diverse stories of mental health. I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful moderator for this session, Di Lee. Di is the founder of Dawn, whose purpose is to shine a light on diverse stories, perspectives, and lived experiences. She's a board member of Multicultural New South Wales, a councillor in Fairfield City Council, one of the most culturally diverse in Sydney. She's a former journalist, reporter, producer, and broadcaster and independent filmmaker, becoming the first Vietnamese Australian journalist in mainstream media. So Di will be moderating the session, and I'd like to introduce you to Di, who will also introduce you to our other panel members who we're delighted to have join us today.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for this opportunity. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather across different states and cities, the elders both past and present. And it's a great opportunity to be part of Bridging Careers, Glow Up Careers, this session on centering oneself. So I have the great opportunity to run this forum on mental health. And mental health is very dear to me. In the work that I do, this topic has really emerged as a very important topic into today's society, given the condition and the situation we found ourselves in here and globally. It is a broad topic to cover, but the issue touches many people, many different demographics, industry, across all sections of our society. Now, more so than ever, especially since the emergence of COVID-19, people are isolated, working from home, and many have lost their jobs or coping with stress. So today's discussion, I've invited a group of individuals with lived experiences from diverse walks of life, perspectives, and backgrounds to share their personal stories and to provide insights on how people can navigate through these challenging times that we all live in. So what I'll do is I'll introduce the different speakers that I have got on the panel. It's Ben Farinazzo, a former veteran, a gold medalist of the Invictus Game in 2018, and a keen sportsman, a father, and a husband. Ben has identified as having lived with mental illness and has, and will share his experience. Narissa Trindade thrived in the change-making space, and her wife lives with a mental condition, and Narissa is a carer. Dr. Judy Tang is with the Victorian Multicultural Commission and a psychologist, so she will give us a perspective there as well. Antonia Lontis survived abusive relationship and now presents her own radio show, and she will talk about resilience. Hawanatu Bangura currently work in the mental health clinic and will talk from a perspective of the African Australian community, but other mental health issues as well. So welcome to this forum, everybody. Everybody's waving because we're told to be on mute until they're spoken to. So look, Ben, can I go to you first? Ben, it's such an honor because I know you've shared with me your story, and I know that we broadcast your story recently on Dawncast around you having lived with mental illness, and you have been very vulnerable. Can you tell us what happened and how did you discover that you had mental health issues?
G'day, Di. G'day, everyone. Yeah, many moons ago, I served in the military as an army officer. During that time, I was fortunate to deploy overseas as part of the international force in East Timor. Whilst I was there, I was part of a group that helped the people in Suai following a church massacre. When I came home from that particular experience, I didn't think that there was anything particular to worry about. I thought I'd handled it well and that all the training I'd received had equipped me. But although my boots were back on Australian soil, my mind was somewhere else. And triggered a range of behaviours in me that made it very difficult for me to live normally back in Australian life.
How severe was your condition, Ben?
Severe to the point that I lost the ability to look after myself, to take care of myself. What that looked like was I was no longer able to talk. And had constant thoughts of wanting to take my own life. Fortunately, there was part of me that didn't want to, but it was very hard to catch that and stop that from happening. So I needed to be hospitalised and ended up being hospitalised for more or less 12 months, following a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, depression and anxiety.
So when did you get hospitalised, and what triggered for you to be hospitalised?
Yeah, so
was it a self-diagnosis and you went in, or did your family came in to kind of said, look, it's time to do something about it?
Yeah, I think when I returned home, came back home to Australia in year 2000, my wife was quick to identify that things weren't quite right. I was somewhat detached and quick to react, really lacked tolerance at the time. Thought I could manage it, thought it'd just go away. After over about 10 years, it got worse and worse to a point where I no longer could sleep. Ended up going and seeing my doctor after reading some stuff on Beyond Blue and doing a Lifeline and calling Lifeline. When I saw my doctor and said, look, I need some help, I'm not sleepy anymore. And fortunate for me, she had a lot of experience in mental health, was able to sit me down and say, Ben, let's have a chat. And that was the first time I felt like I'd been heard, and the first moment that I realised that I needed to look after myself.
I'll come back to you, Ben, but I want to bring Narissa Trindade in here, because Narissa, you care for your wife who lives with a mental condition. So listening to Ben, who's been through that, can you give us a perspective as a carer? how you coped with that, and what did you have to do when you discovered that your wife had mental health condition?
Yeah, sure. Di, and thanks, Ben, for sharing. So the condition my wife has is schizoaffective disorder and PTSD. For those who don't know what schizoaffective disorder is, it's a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder, so bipolar or depression. And the way it panned out was my wife went through a period of very low mood. And then what kicked off on the back of that was psychosis in the form of paranoia, so auditory and visual hallucinations and delusions. And, initially I didn't have a lot of experience. I didn't know a lot about mental health. And for me, honestly, it was quite confronting. And I thought that I could do it all on my own. I mean, she had her team supporting her, but I thought that as a carer, I had to wear all of that responsibility and, it helped support her on my own. And I felt my own anxieties. I felt I felt overwhelmed at times. I felt my stress levels increasing. And it wasn't only till the point where I actually reached out for help for myself, when I actually sought to get therapy myself, and help as a carer, that I felt more able and empowered to better support my wife.
So I suppose with mental health issues, sometimes we focus on the person who've got the condition, but I suppose the weight of the burden of caring is also as much, on the person caring. What were you going through in your mind when you just, have to go through dealing with your wife having that mental health condition? Did you feel alone? Did you feel like, oh my God, I need as much help as she does?
Absolutely, that's very true, Di. I think when you live with someone with a severe mental health condition, it's a range of mixed emotions that you go through. You're right. Over the years, I have felt very scared, frustrated. I think there's an element of guilt that plays into it as well, and also loss. Like when you have expectations of a relationship, and what can and can't happen. And you're right. Through a lot of the period, you feel very, very alone. And it's isolating for the individual going through it, but at the same time it's very isolating and lonely for the person caring, whether that's the family or the sole support person as well. You as much as the person going through it need that help and support to manage your own anxieties, your own feelings, and really cope with some of that so you can be better placed to help your loved ones.
Thanks, Larissa. I'll come back to you. I'd like to bring in Judy and then probably Hawanatu, because both of you work in the clinical environment. So Judy, in a clinical environment, obviously the situations with Larissa's wife and with listening to Ben, from a clinical perspective, how do you, what kind of support or what do you guys do to provide the support that's needed by people like Ben or Narissa?
Thanks for that. For me, and I know for most mental health professionals, our greatest focus and priority is to really get to know their situation in as much depth as possible, because everyone has a different background, different symptoms, different experiences. So for us, it's really trying to get to understand what resources we have to work with, what are the symptoms, the severity of the symptoms that we need to sort of help support and work through. And then from there, we can sort of help work with the person or the family or the unit in creating goals in sort of moving the person towards better mental health. So from a clinical perspective, that's where it starts, and hopefully it ends in a much better place.
And I think one of the focus of like in this forum is around the culturally and linguistically diverse communities, because obviously there's a lot of stigma attached around discussing mental health issues with clinicians or with professionals. Like I think the majority of mental health, when we talk about it in mainstream, they have access to resources such as Beyond Blue, Headspace, and other Lifeline. But in situations like Narissa, for instance, have you found that people of cold backgrounds, as we identify them. Do they access services such as like
Beyond Blue,
psychologists,
Headspace?
Beyond Blue, and all that stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a need, and a lot of them want to access it. It's just the accessing them is difficulty. There are barriers there. It could be something straightforward as no one can speak the language as well. So, you know, let's just say, for example, pick up the phone and call them Lifeline, and you speak a different language already. They're not going to pick up the phone. There's no point. Another one is the system itself is not necessarily well equipped to support a lot of our culturally linguistic diverse people. So, you know, mental health professionals might come without realizing necessarily their own biases of what a person with their own culture might present with, and then run with those assumptions incorrectly, which then gives a person who has a different culture or faith or a background, you know, just a bad taste in their mouth, a negative experience, which then just kind of snowballs into wanting to avoid mental health and the system altogether. So I think there's several barriers, and I've just mentioned some of them, but I mean, definitely love to hear what everyone else has to say too.
So I was going to go to Hawanatu. Are you there, Hawanatu?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Sorry.
So can you, from the African Australian community perspective, in terms of mental health, how have they been coping with it? And, you know, as you've just heard different experiences there, is the African community's experience different to what you've heard from Ben's description and Neresa's description?
Yes, thank you, Di, and it's really lovely to hear from everyone else. In terms of the African community, and I mean, I'm generalizing here, but you know, the concept of mental health is really something that doesn't
I think the audio, Hawanatu audio. Let me come back. We have to come back to you.
That was actually hello.
Hello, you just dropped out, Hawanatu.
Yes.
So they want to come back to you. Oh,
Okay.
how are you going now? Yeah, that's better.
Better. Okay, I've taken the headphone. Do you just want me to start all over?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so what I was saying is that the concept of mental health does not actually exist in the African context. It's just we use, like, you know, people are stressed and then you know you deal with it, or you know, some people, like if they're having hallucination or psychosis or whatever it is, you know, some people are referred to as crazy as well. So when we come here and then having to learn this whole new term, it doesn't actually translate into our own concept of what we know. You know, it's usually people focus on the physical symptoms, like if someone is sick, they focus on that rather than on the mental aspect of things. So there is quite a great barrier there in terms of the language, but also in terms of how people seek help as well, because that's quite a personal thing for them. And there is, you know, to some extent, lack of trust that exists there, and not being able to find someone that's that is similar to them. Say, for example, you know, a therapist or counselor that is from an African background that really can understand the context that they go through, because there is a holistic aspect of it that Judy was talking about in terms of when you assess someone. And, you know, there's a lot of different barriers there that, you know, people have to, that they're facing, and they will rather speak to a friend than actually, you know, seek the support that they require. And then again, I'm just generalizing in terms of, you know, the African community.
Thank you. So, Tony, we'll just come over to your situation. You now present your own radio show, but you have not always been there. Like, it's, you know, you've taken, it's been a journey for you to get there. You want to talk about how you survived,
Yeah.
obviously your trauma, and, you know, from listening to this, the small share so far,
Yeah.
what's your advice?
So I've got a rather long and complicated history, and it probably started in early childhood. I was born with a facial congenital defect, which effectively left me. I had left-sided facial palsy, so from a very young age, I couldn't smile, and that has its own mental health impacts. I suffered from depression, anxiety from probably as early as 15, when I first tried to commit suicide. So I entered my adulthood in a very vulnerable, low self-esteem, naive state. I went into nursing, and I learnt very quickly that from my nursing that there was a stigma around mental health. And back in those days, I'm going to apologise in advance, but many of the doctors would write on patients' charts FTH, F in the head, and that was the mental health diagnosis. So as a nurse, there was no way in hell I wanted that ever to be part of my medical health records. So I really battled. It was
Tony, we've lost you. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Internet. I love the internet. Okay, I think I'll think. Tony,
fair enough.
we probably have to come back to you. It's a beautiful. We have to come back to you. Either find a way, because your internet has dropped off really badly, and we've lost everything you've said. Okay. All right. So, can Ben? I mean, you've just. Yeah. So Ben, do you want to, just listening to what Tony and everybody's just shared there about mental health? It's in terms of the impact on obviously people's lives. How did you decide? How did you start the process of healing?
I thought I had started the process of healing, but I didn't really. I thought, oh, well, you know, I'll get on top of this and, you know, I'll kick its butt and I'll be right in a week. It does, well, in my case, it didn't quite go like that. And there were times when I thought I'd overcome any challenges that I thought were there, but in reality, I hadn't. For me, maybe I'm a bit slower than most, but I found myself in hospital. That was a point where I really had to start working to stay alive. And that just started with just taking care of myself to begin with. Just nurturing myself in a way that was quite foreign to me at the time, rather than just pushing myself. But just listening to what everyone else has said, and your earlier comment, it's amazing the impact that one event on that single individual has on the lives of so many. If I could, I'd reach through the screen and give you a big hug now, Narissa. I mean, I think, you know, you're a champion. Without the, you know, the heroes in the background, our carers and loved ones, you know, the impact on our system across this country would just be so much worse. And it's funny, you know, Australia really has only started a mental health conversation in the last few years. So for those people from different backgrounds who say, that's not part of their language, I totally get it. Because 20 years ago, when I realised that, I wasn't travelling so well, we really didn't talk about it here either. So it's good to see it being spoken about, but also being balanced in that, you can have these challenges, you can get support, and you can move through. And I like how these conversations are sprinkled with a little bit of hope.
Tony, do you think you can go back, just go back to what you're sharing?
I think, did you hear the point where I got to the first time someone tried to help me in my 20s, and then it was another 20 odd years before I was brought to my knees by my mental health in combination with some really horrendous life story stuff. So domestic violence, sexual assault, verbal assault, bullying, anything that can happen in a woman's life pretty much happened to me. And then by the time I got to my 40s, I was battling along, trying to stop the tears most days. And despite that, I still held a corporate level job. I still performed at a high level, but at any moment, that facade was threatening to fall apart. And in the end, it did fall apart. I started crying at work one day after a tiny incident, and I couldn't stop crying. And into that, when I first went and saw my GP, I could say I really loved this guy because he just sat me down and said, Tony, you must stop work. You must look after your mind. You must take medication. You must get some help, or you will not survive this event. And that was the start of a very long period. Into the background of this was my daughter's disclosure of sexual abuse at the hands of the guy that I was going to marry in a few weeks' time. So I kind of had a big journey from there to where I am now. I had a second breakdown some 5 years later, and that was the one that taught me, right, you really need to change your mindset, the way you do life, the way you think about life, etc., etc., etc. And that was the one that I started to learn self-love. I started to learn about mindset. I started to learn about the power we have over our own circumstances, that it's not a diagnosis that will, um, it's not something to be afraid of, that if you embrace it and you seek the help, and there is help, but you have to ask for it, you have to accept it. And that was my struggle. My struggle very much was, I don't need help, I'm going to be okay. But I was not okay. I was shattered in a million pieces. And it's taken a good 15 years to get back to where I am now and to write the book. And then from that to go on and host international live streaming shows connecting Australia to the States and the rest of the world. And so I guess my story around mental health is that you can put yourself back together, that you can have an amazing life, that there is hope, but behind that are the things that you need to do to make sure you stay happy, healthy, and whole. And those are the important things. Things like gardening, walking along the beach, knowing when you need time out, knowing when you have to step back, knowing when it's time to go, okay, I'm out today. I need to sit in a corner and cry until I'm done. You know, so people see this amazing external facade, but behind that is a very real battle with a very real mental health condition. So anyone who supports someone with a mental health condition, I could give you immense love and hugs, because without those people in the world, we would not be able to do what we do. And I think along the lines of Ben, once you get to the other side, there becomes that passion to inspire, empower, educate, and help others, because you can make it through. It's tough and it's not fun and it's ugly and it's horrible, but gosh, where would we be if we didn't live life to our fullest? So mental health diagnosis, you can still have an amazing life. Absolutely, without a doubt. And that's my message. You can be really fractured, but look what you can create with the right help and the right support.
Thanks for that, Tony. And I think it's really great to hear each of your live experiences, and I know we can go into it further. But the purpose of this forum is obviously is part of Glow Career, talking about jobs and losses and people's mental health as a result of COVID. There's been a question that got put to us about, how has COVID impacted the lives of people who've lost jobs and incomes, self-esteem, and mental health issues. So I suppose for you, each of you, please, when I encourage you to have a conversation. For me, it's not about, it's not a one-way channel, it's a two-way conversation. So do come, either raise your hands here if there's an opportunity, or just message me to say, look, I want to chat. But do share your experiences and your thoughts. So you've lived through your own personal experiences. What advice do you think to give somebody, one of the audience or people who come and ask, how do you do with COVID and the impact of job losses on your own mental health? Ben, you can go. Please do share.
Just reflecting on my own experience. So there was a time in my life when I was a CEO, board director, life looked good, had house, car, and then the next day I was, knocked for a six in hospital. And I couldn't go back to that. So what do you put on your LinkedIn profile? And believe it or not, and you might be feeling that as well. It's a big thing. How do you communicate to the world what it is that you do and who it is that you are? And I think that's a bit of a self-reflective process. There's a really good book that I read called The Second Mountain recently, which talks about we're trained in life to finish school, to go to uni, to get the job that we want, to get the house, to get the career, to get the super package. And we go some of us are lucky enough to get to the top of that first mountain and realise, well, what's there? Then you start working your way down the other side of the slope of introspection and realising that the top of the second mountain is joy, moral joy, and realising that purpose can be found in the most simplest things in life. In a morning walk, to hug the people you love, to taking part in conversations, or listening to music while having a chat with a friend. I mean, those little things in life, you can find love and purpose in those simple things. Starting from that basis, then working that out into the outside world takes a bit of vulnerability and a realignment, and it's hard when you're in the middle of it to see beyond it and to work through it, but realise that there are lots of people around you that can support you in that process. You don't have to do that alone. You can reach out.
Thanks, Ben. And Narissa, you've got something to add to that.
Yeah, I do. I think, when you're talking about loss and, what people feel, I think there's, with the stigma associated around mental health, often we feel like, we can't reach out to someone, or, if I share how I'm feeling, then maybe people are going to perceive me as being weak. And I think one thing that, COVID has done is rip the Band-Aid on a lot of that feeling this year. And what I want to say to people is that, it's okay to feel like you're not okay. It's okay to own that feeling and to reach out for help, because like all the panelists have said, there is help out there. There are people that can talk to you. So don't feel like, you might be the only person that may have lost your job in, maybe your family, but don't feel like what you're going through, that you're alone, because whether that is a carer, whether that is a peer worker, whether it's a mental health support person out there, or your family or friends, reach out for help. Because when we do that, when we share what we're feeling, we really I suppose, divide, the sorrow or the loss. And we can really, as Ben said, look towards hope. And there is, anything that we go through, we have the ability to grow through. And experience teaches us a lot. And when we can share those stories, we can really learn from each other. So I encourage you to please don't feel like you're alone, and share and talk to each other.
Thanks, Narissa. Hawanatu?
Yes, just to add to that, and it actually reminded me in May, I think it was. So I was in a different position. I wasn't a mental health practitioner back then. It was just this year. So I was literally on the verge of losing that job in early intervention for children. And when I got told that the funding might not be extended, which was meant to be after June, I was very, very worried about it. And I totally understand people who have either lost their job or on the verge of it. And that uncertainty that comes with that. And, although, there's Social Security, which I thought that's the plan B. But as someone who is independent and, and wants to thrive in the community and also do things, financially, it can be quite a difficult time. So for me, I was fortunate enough to actually, that role got extended, but I really wanted to work also in the mental health space. And hence, I had goals. I mean, I'm a dreamer. So, but interestingly enough, I listed all the things that I wanted to have in my new job. And fortunately, this is what I have right now, working in the mental health space. But I suppose for people who have lost, their jobs and they're feeling depressed and all those things, all the advices there really helps. But one thing as well is with COVID, the opportunity that it brought about is really, looking inside. And, the connections with other people are really great, but sometimes also seeing what the lessons are that are coming up, especially with the jobs. Maybe that was a job that you were not even interested in, or there was something there that wasn't working. And looking into the future that, there's opportunity, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I so believe in that. And looking at ways of actually, creating your own, a vision of your own new job that can really help, and sharing that with people, and practical things like searching online and seeing if you can find that, because our jobs can sometimes be attached to our identity as well. So maybe it's an opportunity to explore new things. And I believe in creativity. So whether it is just doing something at home, and as Tony was saying, it's gardening, it's something else to look after yourself. It's self-care time. And I think that's what really COVID has reminded us about, let's slow down and look after ourselves. And, hopefully that can improve the mental health, but also, on a practical level, you're able to get the job that you actually wanted.
Thanks for that, Hawanatu. But can I just take it back to, let's go back to some of the discussion we just had. Hawanatu, I just want to go to you in terms of the COVID test and the COVID issue. And I don't know if people recall the story of the teenage girls who were tested COVID positive, and then they were later, they went into, I think, returned back to Brisbane or Melbourne and did not, but then they were really trialed by the media. How did that impact you personally, and overall, do you think, how did the community feel about that?
Yes, so in terms of that, so the issue was that these two women, teenage ladies, were pretty much named and shamed in the media. And also they were, their details were exposed, which was breaching, their privacy. And we've seen quite a lot of people actually breach the COVID protocols, and we haven't seen their name or their faces on newspapers or on the news. So for us, as African Australians, it was actually unfair. And we've seen quite a lot of these sort of things happen before, and even in other multicultural communities as well. And what also came out of that was the social media commentary that were quite racist. People saying, "Oh, go back to where you come from," and so that makes it like an excuse for people to be racist. towards Africans, and as we see as well with COVID, towards Asians. So for us, it actually, so due to that, we come together as a community at the moment, to talk about these issues, because what happens is that once those actions by one person or a group of people that are done, and then they are tagged as Africans, and that can actually filter on to, people experiencing racism in the community, like people being, there's a lot of things being said about people. And for me personally, like I didn't experience anything directly, but it hyped up that tension that this could probably, lead to more racism for the African community. So mainly now we really just talk about it. And we've created, for myself personally, I'm part of a racial wellness group for Black women. And that's where, like we meet once a week or so, and we just talk about everything that's going on. There's the little things, there's the microaggression in racism, and there's other things as well that we disclose, and also things that just affect us as humans as well. And it's really important to have this group, whether it's a group or the community just talking about it. But also this time I see a lot of people expressing their views, the African Australians expressing their views on social media, which was really important as well, so we can be seen and heard. And thanks to social media for doing that. So yeah, so it was quite devastating for us to be for them to be put through that. And I mean, they have to face the legal consequences of what they've done, which is fine. But it was just the extent of actually, breaching their privacy, and the impact and the mental impact that it will have on those people, those two women as well. So it can, it was a challenge.
Judy Tang, being the Victorian Commissioner on Victorian Multicultural Commission, you must have, during this whole COVID period, a lot of people, obviously, as Hawanatu touched upon, of culturally linguistic diverse backgrounds have been the brunt around the course of COVID-19 and their mental health and well-being.
Yeah, definitely. We've sort of heard a lot from all our communities, especially the African and Asian communities, around an increase in racism and prejudice towards them. And I guess in some ways, the bad thing is when it happens, especially in the media, it kind of just uncovers what was potentially already there. And for us as the Commission, that's something we're always trying to work in solving and fixing, because and I do agree that the media has an absolutely large role to play in this. In Australia, it's always like, what's the flavor of the month? What's the prejudice of the month? When I was growing up, it was the Vietnamese gangs and drug dealers, and they were always named and shamed growing up. But now you don't hear that as much. But now you hear all, another cultural group is the flavor of the month, so to speak. So I know the Commission and a lot of other organisations are working with the media to bring more diversity in the media. That's one of the first steps to doing that, and having someone as wonderful as yourself, Di, to really pave the way for future generations would be absolutely key in making sure that our communities are supported, and then through that, that our mental health and our communities are supported that way as well. So let's see. I have a lot of hope for the future, I have to say, the current generation, the young kids, because I'm getting older. The youngins are much more connected and much more educated and wise about these things. So for me, that's my hope, and that's my light at the end of the tunnel.
I mean, anybody can jump into this question, but isn't it interesting in terms of mental health? It is important, as I said initially, it's a big, broad topic. And yet underlying that, the topic of mental health, we then have to deal with other issues, cultural issues, even gender issues, the issues of disability. Really, how do you, as each of you, I mean, those who've lived experience of mental health, or caring for mental health, people with mental conditions, how do you kind of, how do you grapple with that? Or what do you What do you think about that?
I think you're right, Di. I think there's a lot of intersectionality, isn't it, that comes into play. Like whether you talk about mental health and being, culturally and linguistically diverse, or in my, own personal experience, I've got that, but then I'm also, in a same-sex relationship, right? So you try going through all those different layers, and, you're right, like I think we've made progress, but there's, still a lot of progress to be made. Even now, when I go to visit my partner in hospital, someone goes, so where's your husband? Or, and I'm like, no, it's my wife. So, you still come across things where you've still got to explain to people, you've still got to, justify relationships. And that's even before you start talking about, mental health and all the different layers that come onto that.
Tony, you were about to say something?
I was just going to say, I learnt very early on that I had to actually work out what worked for me and what self-care I needed before I could start to get better. And that's often around finding the right therapist or finding the right counselor or refinding friends. It's about surrounding yourself with people that care and that love you, and cutting those that don't care that out of your life. And that can be a slow, difficult process in itself, but you can't start to live that wholehearted life, in the words of Brene Brown. You can't live that wholehearted life with all of you invested if you don't look after yourself first. And it does start with your mental health. So even if you're healthy and you don't suffer from any mental illness, you still need to look after your own mind and mental health. So it should be a conversation that we have from with children from an early age, that it's important to look after your mind. It's important to nourish it and care for it just as much as you nourish and care for your body. And if we start teaching young people these things, then that judgment ceases to have the impact that it still seems to have. It breaks my heart when I hear Narissa talk or Hawatas talk about prejudice and judgment and racial vilification, as well as having to deal with mental health. That is not what we want for the world. We need to do things better. We need to act from a higher level of consciousness, and we need to be enabling people that have mental health issues, that's not the end of it. That you can have a job that you love, you can have a life that you love. And like lots of the others have said, I think COVID has forced us to start looking at ourselves, which I think has contributed to the rise in mental health issues or awareness, because we've had to start dealing with ourselves because we've all been locked away. That's not a bad thing, guys. I think that that's a good thing for our future. I'm not sure what the other panelists think, but any conversation that causes humanity to look within themselves and start to be better humans, that's a good thing. And if COVID has brought that about, then that's fantastic. If you're working in a job that you didn't like in the first place and you lost it, well, go find something you love and do that. Yeah? In my humble opinion.
I can see Ben smiling. Ben, what do you can you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think what happens when you go through mental health challenges is that you're trying to find a new world. What we're seeing, in my opinion, happening globally and definitely across Australia is there are communities and groups of people all trying to find a new world, a new at the same time, which comes with it a sense of vulnerability in you're tiptoeing, trying to find parts to link into your identity. I only have to look at the media cycle to see how quickly we can segment different parts of our society into so many different pieces. And sometimes it's nice just to turn the TV off and go for a walk.
I agree completely, Ben. Don't watch the news if you want to preserve your mental health and well-being.
Don't get me wrong, I love the news, but the way that I approach it is look after myself, and then look after those that I love, friends, and then engage with the community. And if it's all turned into shit, then bring it back in. That's basically how it works in my head. Yeah.
Going to what you said, Tony, about this higher level of consciousness, and in terms of, do you all think that if we were all socially conscious and having really wanting more of a conscious awareness, that mental health then becomes an actual mental health, and we don't have to worry so much about our backgrounds, our gender, whatever, but we can actually focus on the mental health. Like if we have a world whereby the level of social consciousness is much higher than we currently have, we don't have to deal with these whole other issues. Do you think? Do you believe? I would love to hear your thoughts, each one of you.
Absolutely. I long for a world where Narissa is treated no differently from me or Ben or Judy or Juanca or Di. Like, that's the world we need.
Oh, your internet, just when you're about to say something brilliant. You're gone, Tony. Oh, no. We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you. Your internet has dropped. Narissa, Judy, and Hawanatu and Ben, tell me.
Yeah, I think that's that is the goal, right? To be living in a world that is totally inclusive, where we don't have to justify who we are, where conversations are easy to be had, where it's okay to not be okay, where I think that's somewhere that we all hope to get to. And I hope that, everything that we're going through now will allow us to grow and learn through those so we can actually move there. But, and that's why I think conversations like this are so important to start that dialogue, and to know that, we have to look after ourselves first, our families, and then the wider community to actually mobilize some of that, because absolutely that is the world that we want to get to.
Hawanatu?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I do agree that social consciousness does go a long way, and us being self-aware of who we are, because as humans we have our ups and downs and whatever else is going on for us, and it's really good to be self-aware. But for other people, in order to support us, it's really good for them just to listen and not try to fix things or try to make it perfect, and especially in the mental health space, because if someone is feeling depressed or going through adversities and someone else is like, oh, you'll be okay, or normalize it, it can be quite a great challenge for people who are experiencing that. It's like, you're not seeing me. Each individual wants to be seen and heard. And sometimes even on interpersonal relationships, it's just being there for that person. You don't have to fix them. You just listen to them and understand them. And I think if we do more of that, we'll definitely be in a much better place. And we are self-conscious, and we're socially conscious about what's going on, and really just in the world in general. Because with COVID right now, everything is just so hyped up, and people are angry, and there's so much emotions going on, like people just want to explode. So it's just really important to listen and for people to be heard. Let's start from there. And I feel like there's a lot of healing that needs to go on, and that has been covered up with all this busyness and the lifestyles that we've sort of had. Like even in the climate, it's like we need to pause and just hear the sound of nature, and then move on from there, just by listening to each other now rather than talking. And I think that will get us to a better start, hopefully in 2021, when hopefully COVID would have eased up by then. That's the hope.
Judy?
I only want to add one thing really quickly. Is just with you're talking about the higher social consciousness, and in many ways, that would be lovely. And I think part of that would be a shift in perspective into a celebration of diversity. And that's something we've been trying to really push for. So I'm also the president of AGMC, which is the Australian LGBTIQ Multicultural Council. So, and just really sharing with people that there is diversity within diversity, and that's something to be celebrated. Differences are a wonderful thing and not an issue or not a box that we have to deal with down the track. So I feel if we can, as a society, get through this and increase our social consciousness and understanding that diversity is something worth celebrating and worth exploring and finding out more about with each other, then we're headed towards the right place.
The government has put a lot of money aside for mental health. So obviously there is recognition. There's recognition. There is recognition that mental health is an issue, right? What do you all think in terms of, it's just going to the major organizations, and as we've discussed here, mental health is a mental health. There are intersectionalities, but at the end of the day, some groups are prepared to talk about it, other groups are less likely to identify with it, but there is an acceptance that that especially through COVID, there's been a rise in people talking about it and people being diagnosed or being identified with having mental health. Do you all think that it's great that there's, first of all, acknowledgement and money aside, and that for community groups such as community groups from your group, Hawanatu, Judy Tang, Narissa, Ben, you're a veteran. Is that great? What's happening, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I see the dollars as a sign of commitment, but it's not a silver bullet. What it takes, I think, is a lot of collaboration between the private, public sector at all levels of society for people to address this issue. Because what appeals to me as a middle-aged dad with a gut is going to be different to somebody else. Yeah, I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. And you need different mechanisms across our society to catch people when they fall. And that might look like a government organisation, might look like a hospital, or it could be a not-for-profit organisation, or could just be a group of well-meaning people. So money, yeah, great, wonderful to see. I absolutely applaud that. It's good to see the conversation going, but I think collaboration is the key.
Who wants to jump in next?
I would, again, the conversation happen with education for our younger generation, that children and particularly teenagers are aware that this is what mental health or mental health problems look like, that's okay, and here's where you get help. Like, I think that I know Ben's talked about it, but it took me so long to get the help that I'd needed, that perhaps had it been acceptable to talk about in my teenage years, maybe that my signs and symptoms had been recognized then, help had been available. If I'd, as a teenager, heard even someone talking about what depression looked like, or what anxiety looked like, or what PTSD looked like, then it would have, as an intelligent teenager, I would have thought, oh, maybe I'm not crazy, maybe I'm not this, maybe I'm not that. Again, I'm a strong advocate for teaching our younger generations from our wisdom as we get older, and I think some of that money should go towards our younger members of society, just so that there's an awareness before we get into our adult lives and before we get to middle age and finally get the help that we should have had a lot earlier. I really am a passionate believer that in terms of, say, crime, that there are mental health issues related to lots of those crimes. So therefore, again, if the education around some of those things, the protections for those children that come from vulnerable families was there at an earlier age, we could circumvent some of these things that are happening in society. I don't know what what the others on the panel think. I'm very passionate about education and information being available to every person from a young age, particularly around mental health, domestic violence, sexual abuse, all of those things. Yeah?
Yeah, I
Anybody
do
wants?
agree with that in the sense of, the commitment is there definitely, as Ben said, and when there's a dollar value associated to it, it becomes part of that media conversation, right? So you turn on news and now actually people are talking about mental health. But, like Tony said as well, it's really important that that filters down and that the message that comes down is very much around, reach out for help, because it doesn't, until we as individuals and as a community can reach out and ask for the help, and that starts from grassroots conversations. That starts from communities saying that it's okay to actually have these conversations, because there's no point just money being there and no one feeling comfortable to actually go out and ask for the help. So I think the top down approach is good, but it's also coming from support and individual conversations that we need to have to build that awareness and education around it, that it's okay to have conversations and ask for help.
I mean, we do have Headspace. Do you think that's enough?
I'd actually like to see programs within school that every Australian child has access to in terms of mental health. And that I know that that's a pretty broad topic, but I absolutely believe that things cease to have power over us when we shine the light on them. So making it okay, as Narissa says, shining the light on these issues, not keeping them in darkness, and and talking about them. That's what sees change across our communities. That's what allows people to feel okay about talking of those secrets, shining that light and making it okay to reach out for help, to talk about your anxiety, to talk about your depression, to talk about what your PTSD looks like in your life, and it to be okay to be an individual in that space. And again, I really believe that it comes back to our children and our young people and allowing them to have those conversations, to start to have those conversations, and to encourage them to talk about this stuff.
Ben, you shook your head when I said, is Headspace enough?
Like I said, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think there's lots of wonderful organisations out there doing things across the country. In particular, we're going to shine a light and shine it on those organisations that are down there in the schools, teaching our kids how to have conversations and not fear going into spaces that their parents and grandparents haven't traditionally gone to. It's okay to talk about how you're feeling and still maintain friendships and get on with your life, and hopefully address those issues before they become bigger issues later on in life. So there are wonderful organisations out there that can do it, and they're not just government organisations. A lot of not-for-profits and charities that are doing great jobs.
Hawanatu?
Yeah, just to add to that, especially looking at children, when we think about it, like even from our own experiences as children, we've gone through, as children, we're very vulnerable. So we're absorbing everything that's happening. And when we face adversities, it's really hard for us to cope. And I remember that, reflecting back on the things that have happened in my childhood and seeing how they shape who I am today and the way I behave or I looked at the world. So I really agree with everyone else. Like early intervention is really important to prevent a lot of mental health issues from happening. So putting the resources into the schools, even primary school, as early as possible, building these people's self-confidence and self.
Okay.
At the developmental stages of children, there's just so like if they are not developing quite well, and they're absorbing all the social things now to do with social media as well, especially for young girls, the insecurities that are associated with the self-image, how they are meant to look, is so it's devastating to see the impact of that. And just hearing from someone the other day that about 3 people either attempted to commit suicide or they actually did at a high school, it's just so devastating. And I think we need to have programs there. We need to have creative educational programs that are actually helping these young this children or teenagers to address the issues, so it's not very confronting for them, but it actually it gives them the opportunity to explore and express who they are, because I think that's where we can all start from, because this really does shape who we become as an adult.
I would like to say that actually the students, some of the high school students, are sitting in New South Wales, sitting for the HSC. So if their parents who are watching this live stream, we want to wish your children, good luck with their HSC starting today. And my son is doing his next week. But I know it has been a very stressful period for a lot of young people during COVID, because obviously kids who are social had to suddenly cut their social lives and being told to lock down. That has had a huge impact on their mental health and well-being. Judy, Victoria's been the worst in terms of cases, but for the young people in Victoria who weren't able to go to school during the lockdown, what are you hearing in terms of?
I'm just going to share something really quickly. When the first lockdown was lifted, my nephew was dancing early in the morning. He put on his school uniform and he's like, "I'm going to school." So I think a lot of the younger generation, the kids, are kind of realizing how fun school is, I guess, in Melbourne. And parents too. Exactly, and parents too. So I hear. So, sorry, what was your question? I was just got sidetracked.
No, basically, in terms of from the start of the COVID, the lockdown, how did that impact? Obviously, it impacted a lot of businesses, communities, but young people who weren't allowed to go to school.
Yeah, well, I think it's impacted a lot of their learning of how society works, and how relationships work and how families work. But not just for the younger generation, for the older generation, like for the adults as well. We're kind of reprioritizing, and all of a sudden, for some family units, they're spending a lot more time together. For other family units, I haven't seen my parents in a while, which I'm sort of looking forward to catching up with them. So I think for at least in Victoria, it's hopefully, silver lining wise, it's been a good learning experience for the children to understand family and relationships, sort of, and how how things, how you think your family might have worked, might have changed for the better, hopefully. But then also recognizing that for some it potentially could be for the worse, and understanding what supports and help we can provide for them to put into place. One of them is, for example, I know a lot of single mother units, especially if they've lost their job, then there's that added stress around there, and so I know the Commission is sort of looking around how can we best support those particular circumstances.
Yeah. So what have you heard then, Judy, in terms of those people, especially from from any walks of life, any backgrounds, but you obviously deal a lot within the culturally and linguistically diverse communities. What is the impact of losing their jobs in COVID during this COVID period? Like, how has the Commission dealt with that?
We've so our role at Commission is to make a lot of noise. I suppose that's a nice way to say it. We do a lot of advocacy and making a lot of noise to say, hey, these people are the ones these are the communities that need support. We need to, let's all collaborate. Ben was talking about collaboration, and that's something that we have the resources to do that. We have heard that a lot of children from multicultural or backgrounds, if their language has not been, how would you say, if their English wasn't very good to begin with, they're potentially dropping out of those Zoom, the online lessons, because it's harder to engage. So that's a huge concern for us, to make sure that the children can re-engage in their education, because the last thing we want them to have is another backstep or several backsteps, especially when they return to class. Another of our concern is potentially down the track, when everything, especially in Victoria, opens up, the notion of re-employment. Are we going to be faced with biases and prejudices when it comes to re-employing people? And we think that that could possibly be the case, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible. So these are some of the barriers that we're thinking of, and certainly the youth, the multicultural youth, are thinking about that as well. So are their job prospects much more harder compared to other youth groups and youth sectors as well?
So in terms of managing mental health, we talked about this before, in terms of how to manage mental health. Is there, just back to you again, Judy, and probably Hawanatu in this, how do you think, in terms of managing mental health culturally and linguistically communities, what are their needs? How are they different comparison to general population, like people like Ben or Tony?
Do you want to start, Hawanatu?
You go while I'm thinking.
Oh, I go. Okay. Would you say, how is it different? First thing to really highlight is everyone's different. So, sometimes we get stuck in the thought of cold. So, somehow it's like the non-multicultural and then the rest of the multicultural group, which really doesn't do justice to the diversity and the richness of multiculturalism. In terms of the differences, I actually, we were talking about some strategies before, and one of my suggestions, I think we need a real push for our mental health professionals to improve their understanding of diversity and intersectionality, and understanding that culture can impact on several different layers of mental health. So one is their experience of mental health. So, for example, let's just say, one person might have hallucinations but then not see it as distressing as someone else from a different cultural background. The other one is the interpretation of their mental health. In general, this is again a generalization. I mean, there's research to show that non-Western cultures tend to somaticize their symptoms compared to Western cultures. What's the word? There's more sort of focusing on psychosize. Is that a word? It's not a word.
Just make it up.
Exactly, it's a new word. I've invented it. So, for example, an example is a person from an Asian background might express their depression as back pain and headaches, compared to someone from a Western background who's more likely to say, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling down. So it's those kind of understanding and richness in difference that I think professionals really need to understand, so that everyone, like Tony said, everyone has fair and equal footing on receiving equitable mental health services.
Actually, you just touched upon something. I spoke to a group of young students recently who's preparing for the HSC, and they're from culturally linguistic diverse backgrounds. They were born here, but their parents were refugees.
Yeah.
And they said, they were stressed. A lot of their friends are stressed and really for the HSC, but also because COVID meant that they can't socialize, they can't do anything, and they felt very depressed. But of course, their parents, who are refugees, who have lived in refugee camps, who've escaped, like myself, who've escaped on a boat and nearly died, kind of hit them around the head and say, "Wake up! What are you talking about? Why are you being sad? That's get out of it. There's no need to be sad." So that's that perspective from the parents who says, "You talk about depression and hardship. That's not depression and hardship.
Yeah,
it's surviving on a boat. That's stress. That's not even stressful for them, because it's about we had to live, we had to survive."
Yeah.
And so when they hear their kids talk about, oh, we're depressed, we can't see our friends, and we're stressed, because they said, wake up, we don't accept that. And then the kids get more stressed because that means they can't actually share with their parents, and the parents don't see it. So those are the worlds that these kids, young kids, are living in. And I, so for me, I'm thinking I was going to throw this kind of banners in the work, because I'm thinking, well, I've been a refugee, I've lived in camps as well, and I don't think I've had any trauma. I don't think so, but I have not been diagnosed to have any PTSD. But what do you say to those who've had, Ben, Tony, those lived experiences? Like, how do you, if people were to say that to you, what do you say to them?
Look, I think it's about meeting people where they're at. And if someone's not feeling particularly well, it's hard for you to say that they're not. And the level to which they are distressed is determined based on their own perspective. And so to roll your own perspective over the top of that is being less than respectful, which is what we were talking about earlier.
So no judgment. So you're saying so each of us have our lived experiences, and just because we've had one doesn't necessarily mean the other person should experience that, so we should not be judging and to be more generous.
I think judging is one way of looking at it. I would actually say it's about being more compassionate. So here we are saying, let's embark on a national conversation on mental health, and let's talk about all these new wonderful terms and educate people, but as soon as they start using them, let's tell them not to use them. So you've got to allow the conversation to roll out to find an equilibrium across the community. One person's depression is another person's bad morning. So who knows? But you can't say, well, this is what it is. For some people, it impacts on their life in a different way. It's just basically a sign that person's putting their hand up, asking for help, and looking for someone to show them a bit of love and support. I think that's something we can all keep an eye out for.
Thanks, Ben. Narissa?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Ben, because I think, what you were touching upon, Di, what we've got to understand when we talk about mental health, it's all relative. My experience isn't greater than, yours, or if someone comes and shares something, it isn't about me. It isn't about the person that's listening, right? It's about the person that's sharing what they're going through. And we don't need to look at it from a diagnosis or not a diagnosis. It's really about understanding what does it mean for that individual, what are they going through, and what are the symptoms that they're facing. And it's relative only to that person. And I think that's so important to take out from this, because as we go and we have more of these conversations, it's very easy when someone comes and says, look, I'm feeling very overwhelmed, that we go, oh yeah, totally, I know what you're feeling, let me tell you what to do. And it's not about us. It's really about what that individual is going through, and really about actively listening and being there to support.
We've got about probably another 10 minutes left. So I'll, Hawanatu, did you were going to say something when Judy was talking? Do you want to?
Yes, I'll go. Yeah, just in relation to that question about, the needs of the community. And I mean, I'm going to generalize here, especially in the African community, because we really thrive on the collectiveness, the togetherness of us. So we enjoy each other and celebrating together. We're not an individualistic community. So in those cases, like when we, when people are seeking help, it's really important to see who else can be brought in to the conversations. And I witnessed an event, a mental health and well-being event over the weekend, focusing on African women. And one of the things that, was mentioned was that as a carer or as a mother of someone who is looking after, caring for someone with a mental health condition, it's like they're not even in therapy room conversations, and they're put aside. So it's that sort of thing, looking at who you know, whether it's the that can be by their side to support them. And I thought with that event as well, it was just really, well, they were willing to open up and share their personal experiences, what they've gone through, and, you know, helping us connect with them, even though we didn't go through something like that, but also looking at what's going on here, or how we can help someone else who might be going through something similar. So it's really important to have that, you know, collective approach to it, and but also considering people's culture and also religion as well, because with mental health, you know, some people do seek religious support, so they do pray, and to some extent that does help, you know, with their mental health conditions, and it helps to improve that. But, you know, just things that people need to consider, and just needs of, because people might be, you know, needing different things. Some people might not even want community or family to be involved, whereas other people do want that. So looking at the context and where they're from, and create. Again, I mean, as a therapist or someone supporting a person who's going through mental health condition, that's what I would say.
Thanks, Hanawatu. Now we've got 5 minutes probably left before for final questions or comments before Yvonne jumps back on. But you mentioned something there, Hawanatu, that I want to take up, which is the collective versus the individualism. I think that's two, and that is, I think, probably something that we, I think, government policy makers, decision makers need to take into consideration when it comes to mental health. Because Hawanatu, Judy, myself, we come from a collective society living in an individualistic country. so that is care comes from that is going to be actually interesting. You know, it's about how collective groups, how people from collective society live and work and communicate and deal with issues such as mental health, versus the individual society, whereby it is so separate to the rest. So there's something that's actually an insight. Hopefully, you know, if there's any government officials or watching this, that could take into a policy decision, you know, making. So what's any last comment in regards to mental health? What have we got from today's discussion for me, other than the individualism and versus collectivism? And that's going to be very interesting. Any last comment about advice that you can give to those who might be identifying that they are suffering or are living with a mental health condition in times like this? I'll go from Ben, to Tony, Judy, Narissa.
I think if you think that something might be wrong, first of all, turn around to all those people that are close to you and say thanks to them for putting up with you for so long and for helping you out, because you need them on your team. Then go and support them by going and seeing a doctor and a mental health expert to get the professional support you need, to not only for yourself but for them as well, so that hopefully you can learn a few things, lighten the load on those that you love, and help teach your kids and your loved ones a few things, so you can help break that cycle in the future.
Hawanatu?
Okay, sorry, there's a airplane going past. Yeah, I would say, I mean, we've mentioned this a lot, but really reaching out, and it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to reach out, and whether it's just one single person that you can speak to, and that means the person that they speak to as well is able to be there for them, and also being able to find the support that this person needs. Because when someone is going through, you know, mental health concerns, it's really hard for them to see clearly. So if that one person is there, you know, just guiding them and being by their side, whether it means, you know, going to these places, is really, really important, you know, to the person who is experiencing it. So, I mean, initially, you know, people need to check, how long has this been going on for? Is it, is it depression? Has it been going on, low mood, lack of interest in activities and things like that? Has that been going on for more than 2-3 weeks? What's the cause of it? And if they find that, they're not able to address it on their own, do reach out. There are some support out there, or just to a friend or someone else who you trust really to be vulnerable with. I really strongly encourage that.
Thanks, Hawanachi. We've got very short, a minute each, Tony, Judy, and Narissa.
All right, 1 minute. I'll do 45 seconds.
Yes.
For me, it's the absolute respect and honor that I've had, and the pleasure of being on a panel with these people. For me, it's the renewed respect for seeing the absolute strength, resilience, and positivity from all of you. And all I can say is thank you. And I hope people can very much learn from what you've all been able to share with us today. So thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Narissa?
Thank you, firstly, to Yvonne, to Di, the team at Cisco, and everyone for putting on this conversation, and to all the panelists for sharing your own experiences. It's just been really good to have this conversation. And for anyone that is suffering with anything mental health related, or you just know that you're not alone, and there is no shame in asking for help. It takes courage, and when you do ask for help, there is a lot of help out there. So please ask for it, and know that bad times don't last, and there is hope and there is positivity to come. So hold on to that.
Thanks, Narissa. Tony, you're not going to drop off on us, hopefully. Tony? You're mute. You're on mute. Okay, I think she's frozen.
That's fine, Di. We can come back. We can bring Tony in before we finish if she comes back. Well, thank you all for such an amazing and inspiring conversation, and the rawness and authenticity that you've brought to the conversation today. And it is such an important topic for everyone. We had some really nice messages of support coming through the chat. We had some people that are doing it tough at the moment that have really appreciated the insights and advice. And yeah, interesting to hear the topics of diversity and inclusion, and obviously resilience. And these are sessions that we'll be running later this week. So we're really excited tomorrow to have a diversity and inclusion panel with including Craig Foster. So tune in at 2 p.m. for that one. And Di, you also mentioned about obviously the lived experience. On Wednesday at 2 p.m. we're covering resilience. We're delighted to have Lane Beachley and Stacey Copus, and we have Antoinette Lattouf, who heads up Media Diversity Australia and works at Channel 10. But in relation to lived experience, Yasser will be joining us, who's a former refugee who survived his boat sinking on the way to Australia. So yeah, that will be a very lived story experience to hear. So yeah, if any of you can join us for further sessions, that would be great. Thank you, Di. It was beautifully moderated and some great questions. Hawanata, really appreciate your support. Narissa, thanks for all your insights and being so open to us. Similar, Ben, for sharing your experiences. Tony, Tony, are you back online now?
Yes, I think I'm back before it dark, and my wonderful panel. What a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And Judy, yeah, great to get your input and yeah, and have a different perspective as to how we can support and manage mental health in our communities. So, you know, please remember that I know for some people this has probably brought up some feelings of distress. So, as I said on YouTube in the chat box, we have a list of providers. You can call 000, obviously, in an emergency, but I think a message is that you really need to reach out and seek professional advice. I think, Ben, you just mentioned that you know, put your hand up and really get some experts. So obviously at Glow Up Careers, we're career coaches, we're not counsellors. So we have had a couple of people ask us if we can support, and we can obviously support with career questions, but for professional counsellors, yeah, that's not our area of expertise. And if you would like to connect